The biting wind swept through the dark city streets, carrying the scent of gasoline, stale food, and despair. João curled up in the corner of a storefront awning, his thin arms wrapped around himself in a futile attempt to ward off the cold. His tattered coat barely offered any protection, and his shoes were so worn out that he could feel the icy pavement beneath his feet. He no longer knew exactly how long he had been living like this. The days blended into an endless cycle of hunger, fear, and survival. Some memories still haunted him: the smell of freshly cooked rice in his old home's kitchen, the muffled laughter of his younger sister, the sound of the door closing the day his mother left and never came back. Now, the streets were his home. The forgotten children of the city beside him. Nina slept with her head resting on an old backpack that held nothing but a thin blanket and a few pieces of dirty clothing. Strands of her messy brown hair covered her face, and her fingers clutched a piece of stale bread tightly, as if afraid someone might steal it. Davi was a little further away, leaning against the wall of a closed bar, staring at the starless sky. He was the oldest of the group, around 14 years old, and the one who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. João knew that he was looking for some kind of answer in that vast darkness, perhaps a sign that things would get better. But signs never came. In the distance, footsteps echoed against the wet pavement. The three of them tensed. On the streets, any sound could mean danger. "Relax, it's just Vico," Davi murmured, recognizing the thin silhouette of the boy approaching. Vico was only 10 years old and one of the few kids who still smiled from time to time. He carried a plastic bag with something inside and lifted it like a trophy. "Look what I found at the market," he said excitedly, handing João some bruised fruit and a half-eaten piece of bread. "Found, huh?" Davi raised an eyebrow. Vico shrugged. The guy threw it away. Nobody wanted it anyway. João took an apple, feeling his stomach growl. He no longer had the luxury of questioning where the food came from. He just ate. The invisible danger the piece didn't last long. A scream tore through the night, coming from somewhere down the street. Nina jolted awake, her eyes wide with fear. "It came from near the square," she whispered. "We should get out of here," Davi said, already standing. They knew that screams in the middle of the night never meant anything good. They could be drunken fights, robberies, or something worse. Their survival instincts told them to stay away, but João hesitated. He recognized that scream. Before they could stop him, he was already running down the empty street, his heart pounding. Davi cursed before following, dragging Nina and Vico along. As he turned the corner, João came to an abrupt stop. On the damp sidewalk, a little girl lay trembling. Her dress was covered in mud, and blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. Two men were walking away quickly, vanishing into the darkness. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Too young to be there alone. Too young to be hurt like that. A tightness gripped João's chest. He didn't think, he just acted. He knelt beside the girl and gently touched her shoulder. "Hey, are you okay?" The girl blinked, her terrified eyes staring up at him. She tried to shrink away, but she was too weak to run. "We need to get out of here," João said, his voice firm. Davi let out a heavy sigh behind him. This is going to be a problem. But none of them stepped away. For the first time in a long time, something bigger than fear guided their steps. The girl trembled like a leaf in the wind, her large, frightened eyes staring at João without understanding. Her skin was cold to the touch, and blood slowly trickled down her forehead, mixing with the dirt. "We need to get out of here now," Davi said, looking around. He always had that alert expression, as if expecting the worst at any moment. Nina approached slowly, trying not to scare the girl even more. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The girl pressed her lips together, hesitant. "Isa," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Nice to meet you, Isa." "You're safe now," Nina assured her, even though she wasn't sure it was true. João helped Isa to her feet, noticing how incredibly light she was. She had probably gone days without eating properly. Vico tugged on Davi's sleeve. "And now, we can't go back to the awning with her." He was right. If Isa was running from someone, and everything suggested she was, they couldn't risk being found in their usual spot. Davi sighed, scratching the back of his neck. "I know a place. Come on." The hidden refuge. They walked through the deserted streets, avoiding the lit avenues and the few cars still roaming the city at that hour. Davi led them through a narrow alley where the smell of garbage was nearly unbearable. "Here?" João asked, doubtful. Davi simply pushed aside a wooden board leaning against the wall of an abandoned building. Behind it, there was a dark opening, too narrow for an adult to pass through. "Come on," he said, stepping inside first. One by one, they squeezed through the hole and found themselves in a cramped space, surrounded by crumbling brick walls. The ceiling was low, supported by rotting wooden beams, but at least the wind didn't get in. On the floor, scattered pieces of cardboard formed something resembling a nest. "Welcome to our palace," Davi said sarcastically. Nina helped Isa sit down while João tore a piece of his own shirt to clean the wound on her forehead. "What happened to you?" he asked. Isa didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were distant, as if she were still trapped in whatever had happened before they found her. I just wanted to go home," she finally whispered. João felt a familiar tightness in his chest. None of them had a home to go back to. The rules of the street. Davi sat in the corner of the room, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Tomorrow, we need to find out more about her," he said. "If someone's looking for this girl, it could be a problem. We can't just leave her," João replied. "And who said I want to?" Davi sighed. "I'm just saying we need to be smart." Vico, who had been quiet until then, nudged Nina. "Can she stay with us?" Nina exchanged a quick glance with João. "If she wants to," she replied. Isa silently observed them, her eyes moving from face to face, studying them. After a few seconds, she simply rested her head on Nina's shoulder and closed her eyes. The group didn't say another word. They just sat there, listening to the wind outside and feeling each other's warmth. For the first time in a long time, João didn't feel completely alone. The dawn of a new challenge. As the sun began to rise over the city's tall buildings, life in the streets resumed. People hurried to their destinations, cars honked, street vendors shouted out their deals. But for the children of the wind, each new day was a battle. João looked at Isa, still asleep, and realized that his life had changed. They were no longer just a group of kids trying to survive. Now, they were a family. And families protect each other. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when João felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. He opened his eyes, blinking against the faint light that seeped through the cracks in the wall. Nina was crouched beside him, her expression filled with worry. "She has a fever," she whispered, pointing at Isa. João sat up quickly. The little girl was curled up, her pale skin damp with sweat. Her small body trembled slightly, and her breathing was uneven. "Damn it," Davi muttered, watching the scene. "We need to get some medicine." Vico, sitting in the corner, shook his head. "Where are we supposed to find medicine?" The group exchanged uneasy glances. Getting food was already hard enough. Stealing from pharmacies was nearly impossible, and asking adults for help could be dangerous. João looked at Isa, so small and fragile. They couldn't just ignore this. "I'll handle it," he said, standing up. Nina grabbed his arm. "João, wait, how?" He didn't answer. He just slipped through the hole in the wall, his heart pounding. The market of opportunities. The streets were already bustling when João arrived at the main square. Dozens of stalls sold fruits, cheap clothing, and questionable electronics. Vendors shouted their deals, trying to attract customers. João weaved through the market, analyzing his option. He knew he couldn't just grab whatever he wanted. The sellers here were sharp and quick, but there was another way. He spotted an old man sitting beside a small popcorn cart, wiping sweat from his forehead with a grimy cloth. Next to him, a candy stand was crowded with customers. João took a deep breath and approached. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. The man looked at him with suspicion. "Help how?" "I can call customers, clean the cart, anything," João said, keeping his gaze firm. "I just need some spare change." The vendor scoffed. "Kid, you think money grows on trees? Get out of here." João clenched his fists. He was about to insist when a shout erupted from the other end of the market. "Get him." His stomach dropped. He turned just in time to see a boy running, clutching a few stolen apples. Behind him, an angry merchant was chasing him, gripping a wooden stick. The scene unfolded fast. The boy tripped, fell, and within seconds, he was yanked up by his collar. João looked away. He already knew how this would end. There was one rule on the streets: never get involved. The hard road with no other choice, João searched the area until he found a pharmacy. He stayed on the opposite side of the street, watching. The clerk, a burly man with a thick beard, was talking on the phone, distracted. João could just walk in and take a bottle of medicine, but what if he got caught? He took a deep breath and crossed the street, stepping cautiously into the pharmacy. "Excuse me," he called. The clerk glanced at him, already looking annoyed. "What do you want?" João swallowed hard. "My little sister is sick. We don't have money. Can you help?" The man studied him for a few seconds. "You live on the streets?" João hesitated, then nodded. The clerk sighed, rubbing his face. "Wait here." João held his breath as the man disappeared into the back. A minute later, he returned with a small box. These are some fever pills. It's not much, but it'll help. João took the medicine with trembling fingers. Thanks, really. He hurried out before the man could change his mind. A small act of kindness back at the hideout. João found Nina holding Isa's hand while Davi and Vico tried to keep the place warm with pieces of cardboard. Did you get it? Davi asked. João showed the box. Nina let out a relieved sigh. How did you manage that? João gave a small smile. Some people still listen. They gave Isa the medicine, and even though she was weak, she managed to swallow it with a sip of water. João looked at his friend. Surviving was hard, but together, maybe they could make it. Because, no matter how invisible the world made them feel, inside that small cardboard shelter, they saw each other. Isa's fever gradually subsided throughout the day, but she was still weak. João watched her sleep. Her small face finally relaxed for the first time since they had found her. She's going to be okay, Nina said, sitting beside him. João just nodded, but he knew danger still lurked. Nothing on the streets was ever certain. On the other side of the hideout, Davi and Vico shared a stale piece of bread they had managed to get earlier. We need to find more food, Davi murmured. We can't rely only on the market scraps. Vico shook his head. But how? Davi looked at João. I know someone who might help. The man in the gray coat. They walked through the crowded streets until they reached a narrow alley behind an abandoned building. The air was thick with the smell of mold and urine, and João kept Isa close as they followed Davi. Standing next to a pile of crates was a tall man wearing a worn-out gray coat and a cap. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but his sharp eyes analyzed the group the moment they approached. Well, the man said with a crooked smile. Thought you'd disappeared, Davi. I need food, Davi replied bluntly. The man scratched his chin. Nothing comes for free, kid. Davi clenched his fists. What do you want? The man looked at João and the others, then nodded toward a small grocery store across the street. The owner of that place owes me a favor, but he's been stubborn. If you can get me something from in there, I can help you with food. João felt a knot tighten in his stomach. You want us to steal? The man chuckled. Call it what you want, but think about it. Hungry kids do much worse for much less. A heavy silence settled between them. Davi looked at João and Nina, waiting for an answer. So, the hardest choice. João looked down at Isa, who was clinging to his arm, her wide eyes full of fear. He knew he had to protect her, just like Nina, Vico, all of them. They were starving, but he also knew that one wrong move could cost them everything. No, Davi frowned. What? We're not doing this? João insisted. There has to be another way. The man in the gray coat narrowed his eyes. Then good luck surviving. He turned and disappeared into the alley. Davi kicked a nearby can, frustrated. We needed that food, João. And what if we got caught? João shot back. You know what happens to kids who steal. Davi didn't reply. He knew João was right. Nina stepped forward. We'll figure something out. We always do. João looked at his friends, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. They had refused the easy option. Now, they needed to find another way, and fast. João's refusal to accept the deal with the man in the gray coat had left an unspoken tension in the air. Davi was frustrated, and hunger was beginning to take its toll on the group. Isa, despite being better, was still weak. They needed food, and fast. João knew they had to find a solution, but without resorting to stealing. He had seen too many street kids disappear after being caught. So what do we do now? Vico asked, sitting on the floor of their hideout, hugging his knees. We find a way, João said, trying to sound confident. An unexpected opportunity. By late afternoon, they returned to the main square. As João observed the movement, he noticed a group of slightly older boys gathered around a large trash can. They were laughing, seemingly entertained by something. Davi followed João's gaze and crossed his arm. It's a game. What kind of game? Nina asked. Davi pointed to a pile of bottle caps on the ground. They bet bottle caps on challenges. Whoever wins the most can trade them for food with one of the vendors who help street kids. João frowned. Does it seem fair? Davi smirked. Fair? Nothing on the streets is fair, but it's better than stealing. Before anyone could react, Vico had already run up to the group. I wanna play, he said excitedly. The older boys looked at him, some laughing. You? One of them, a thin teenager around 16, scoffed. Do you even know how to play? Teach me, and I'll learn. Vico shot back. João sighed, knowing they didn't have many choices. If this game could get them food, it was worth a shot. We'll play too, he said, stepping forward. The older boy grinned, evaluating them. Fine, but know this. Here, if you lose, you leave with nothing. A chill ran down João's spine, but he nodded. The game had begun. The challenge the rules were simple. Each player bet a bottle cap and had to throw a stone into a circle drawn on the ground. Whoever hit the most shots won everything. The first rounds began. João missed his first throw but landed the second. Davi was precise, while Vico, despite his enthusiasm, missed both attempts. The best player was Mauricio, the 16-year-old. He hardly ever missed, smirking every time someone else failed. As the rounds progressed, João felt the tension building. They had to win. Finally, it came down to the last round. João and Mauricio were tied. One final throw would decide everything. João took a deep breath, focused, threw the stone, bounced, spun, and landed inside the circle. The group erupted in celebration. Mauricio, surprised, just chuckled. "Not bad, kid. You got lucky." He tossed a small bag to João. Inside were a few pieces of bread and an apple. "Rules are rules," Mauricio admitted. "But be careful, luck never lasts forever." João took the food and nodded. Luck might run out, but for now, they had one. A champion's dinner back at the hideout. The group divided their spoils. It wasn't much, but it was enough to satisfy their hunger for the night. Isa took her first bite of bread and smiled. "It's good," she whispered, her voice weak but happy. João looked at his friends and realized that no matter how hard things got, they still had a chance. They were survivors, and as long as they stuck together, they would keep fighting. The night was cold and silent when João woke up with a bad feeling. Inside the hideout, the others were sleeping deeply, exhausted from the day, but something outside felt wrong. He got up slowly and crept toward the crack in the wall, straining to hear the city's distant sounds. Footsteps. They weren't ordinary footsteps. Not the clumsy steps of a drunk or the cautious tread of another homeless person looking for shelter. These steps were firm, calculated. Someone was looking for them. The invisible threat. João nudged Davi, who woke up with a start. João whispered, pressing a finger to his lips. "There's someone outside." Davi blinked a few times, waking up fully. Then, he heard it too. Nina opened her eyes slowly and noticed their tense expression. "What's going on?" Before João could answer, a voice echoed from the alley. "I know you're in there." João's blood ran cold. The voice was deep and emotionless, cold as the concrete beneath their feet. Davi glanced at João, then at the exit. "We need to get out." The escape. João grabbed Isa in his arms while Nina and Vico quickly stood up. Davi was the first to crawl through the hole leading to the side alley. They moved fast, but so did the footsteps outside. "Run," Davi whispered urgently. They darted through the narrow opening and into a labyrinth of dark alleys. João held Isa tightly, his bare feet hitting the icy ground as fast as he could move. The man's voice still echoed behind them. "It's no use running. I always find you." They turned a corner and slipped onto a slightly busier street. João's heart pounded. They couldn't just disappear into the crowd. They weren't like the adults who blended in. They were just kids, dirty, wearing ragged clothes. The man could appear at any moment. That's when João spotted an open door. "Here," he whispered, pulling the others inside. They rushed into an abandoned building and crouched behind a pile of debris. The air was thick with mold and rotting wood. The footsteps grew closer. They held their breath. The man stopped just outside. The silence was unbearable. Then, he laughed, a low, humorless chuckle. "I'll be back." The footsteps faded, but João knew this wasn't over. Who was he? After a few minutes, Davi was the first to stand. "Who the hell was that guy?" Nina held Isa close, trying to comfort her. "He knew where we were," João murmured, still trying to process it. "But how?" Vico looked at them, scared. "And what does he want with us?" No one had an answer, but one thing was clear, they were no longer safe. And for the first time, João wondered if they had become prey in a game they didn't even know they were playing. The silence inside the abandoned building was oppressive. The smell of damp wood and rust lingered in the air, mixed with the growing tension between them. Isa was still trembling in Nina's arms while João peeked into the alley through a crack in the wall. The man had left, but his presence still weighed on them like a shadow. "What do we do now?" Vico asked, his voice low but filled with fear. Davi clenched his fists. "First, we find out who that guy is." The past returns. João moved away from the crack and faced Davi. "And how do we do that? He could be anyone." Davi bit his lower lip, thinking, "No, he can't be just anyone. He knew where we were. That means either he's been watching us for a while, or someone told him." The words hung in the air like an invisible weight. "You think someone gave us up?" Nina asked, holding Isa tightly. "I think we need to find out," Davi replied seriously. They needed information. And on the streets, information was more valuable than Money. The man under the bridge. Davi led them to a place they rarely visited, the old bridge on the outskirts of the city. There, among makeshift shacks, lived a man named João, a former homeless man who had spent his life on the streets. He had aged on these corners and alleys, but he knew everything that happened in the city. He was sitting in a broken plastic chair, smoking a cheap cigarette, his tired eyes watching the movement around him. Well, Raul said when he saw them approaching. The city's orphans. What do you want from me? João exchanged a glance with Davi before stepping forward. There's a guy hunting us. Big, deep voice. He knew exactly where we were. Raul exhaled smoke slowly, showing no surprise. I know who he is. João's heart pounded. Who? Raul tapped his cigarette on the edge of the chair, his dark eyes studying them carefully. They call him the Hunter. Silence took over the group. The Hunter? Nina repeated, frowning. Raul nodded. He works for powerful people. He does the dirty work that no one else wants to do. A chill ran down João's spine. Dirty work? Like what? Raul put out his cigarette on the ground. He finds kids like you and makes them disappear. What did they know? The world seemed to spin. João swallowed hard. Disappear. Where? Raul shrugged. Depends. Sometimes they send them to juvenile homes. Other times, no one ever hears from them again. Fear spread among them. But why? Davi insisted. What did we do? Raul narrowed his eyes. The real question is, what did you see? The question caught João off guard. He exchanged a confused look with his friends. We didn't see anything, Nina said. Raul sighed. Then someone wants you gone, and fast. The Hunter wasn't after them by accident. Someone wanted them out of the way. But why? A new plan. The group left the bridge with more questions than answers. João felt the weight of fear pressing on his shoulders. They weren't just kids trying to survive anymore. They were targets. We need to find a way to make this guy stop chasing us, Davi said, walking fast. How? Vico asked. By finding out who sent him after us, João answered, determined. They couldn't just keep running. If they wanted to survive, they had to start hunting too. That night, the city felt different. The streetlights cast long shadows across the alleys, and every corner seemed to hide an invisible threat. João's heart pounded with every step. Now, it all made sense. They weren't just running from a man. They were running from someone powerful enough to want them erased. But why? They didn't know anything, did they? What if it's a mistake? Nina asked, holding Isa's hand as they walked through the streets. Davi shook his head. There are no mistakes on the streets. Someone wants us gone, and that means we're in the way of something big. But what? Vico asked, nervously looking around. João stopped, thinking. Then, the memory hit him like a shockwave. The day everything changed he remembered a few weeks ago, when they were still hanging around the market square, trying to get food. He and Davi had slipped into an alley to avoid a police officer, and that's when they overheard the argument. Two voices. One belonged to an older man, commanding and firm. The other sounded nervous. This needs to disappear, the firm voice said. If anyone finds out, we're dead. I already got rid of everything, the other responded. I don't trust you. If this ends up in the wrong hands, we're finished. At the time, João hadn't understood what it meant. He and Davi had run away before they could be seen. But now, Davi's eyes widened as he realized the same thing. We overheard something we shouldn't have. Nina frowned. But you don't even know what it was. And they don't want to take any chances, João concluded. Now it made sense. The Hunter wasn't just following them. He had a mission, to silence witnesses, searching for answers. If they wanted to survive, they needed to find out who was behind this. João took a deep breath. We have to find that man. The one from the conversation? Vico asked, eyes wide. But the city is huge. Davi narrowed his eyes. Maybe Raul knows. Going back to the bridge was risky, but they had no other choice. The answer, they didn't want to hear. The walk to the bridge was tense. The fear of running into the Hunter at any moment made everyone's nerves raw. Raul was still there, sitting in the same place, as if he had been expecting them. I knew you'd be back, he said before they even spoke. João got straight to the point. We need to know who hired the Hunter. Raul sighed, as if deciding whether he should answer. Then, he looked at them seriously. The name you're looking for is Colonel Brandeo. The name hit them like thunder. Who is this guy? Nina asked. Someone with a lot to lose if you stay alive, Raul replied. He runs the dirty business in this city. Trafficking, corruption, anything you can imagine. And you overheard something you shouldn't have. João felt his stomach knot. They were up against someone powerful. very powerful. And now, there was no turning back. Se quisser continue traduzindo os próximos capítulos, minha vez. Você diz, o ChatGPT diz, aqui está a tradução do capítulo 9, The Last Refuge. Chapter 9, The Last Refuge. The name Colonel Brandeo echoed in João's mind like distant thunder, ready to become a storm. Someone like him could do whatever he wanted. By silence, erase traces, and now, erase them. Davi clenched his fists, breathing deeply. So it's that bastard who wants to get rid of us. But how did he find out we overheard something? Nina asked, pulling Isa closer. Raul sighed, putting out his cigarette. These things always come back. Someone must have told him. Someone who knew you were nearby. A shiver ran through João, the man in the gray coat. Raul nodded slowly. He works for Brandeo. He's an informant. Sees everything, hears everything. He probably realized you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Silence fell over them. Now, everything made sense. The hunter wasn't chasing them for pleasure. He had an order. Make those kids disappear. Vico glanced around nervously. If this guy is so powerful, what can we do? João took a deep breath. We need to leave the city. Escape plan. Davi let out a dry laugh. And where would we go, João? Do you think there's a place waiting for us? Out there? João didn't know, but he knew they couldn't stay. What we can't do is sit here waiting for him to find us. Nina nodded. If we find a way to leave, we can go to another city. Disappear for good. João looked at Raul. Do you know anyone who can help us? The old man studied them for a few seconds. Then, he took a piece of paper and scribbled something on it. There's a man at the bus terminal. If they call him Barba, Beard, you've found the right guy. Tell him I sent you. Maybe he can do something. João took the paper, feeling the weight of the decision. They were about to leave everything behind. If they made a mistake, if they got caught, there would be no second chance. But they had no choice. It was run or disappear. The last night, the group returned to their hideout one last time. João looked around at the peeling brick walls, the cardboard scraps on the floor. This place, which had never been a real home, now felt safer than anywhere else in the city, but they couldn't get attached. We rest a little and leave before dawn, Davi said. Everyone agreed. João lay next to Isa, who was still holding his hand tightly, as if afraid he would vanish. He stroked her hair, silently making a promise that he wouldn't leave her behind, that he wouldn't leave anyone behind. Outside, the wind whistled through the alleys, and somewhere in the city, the hunter was still lurking, but this time, they wouldn't be easy prey. The city was wrapped in a silent veil as João, Davi, Nina, Vico, and Isa left their hideout for the last time. The biting cold surrounded them like a warning. This would be the most dangerous night of their lives. The bus terminal was only a few kilometers away, but between them and freedom, there were guarded streets, watchful eyes, and a hunter on their trail. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. At the terminal when they arrived, the terminal was almost empty. A few homeless people slept on the benches, while janitors swept the dirty floor. João held tightly to the paper Raul had given him. He scanned the area, his heart racing. Who is this Barba's guy? Vico whispered. Before João could answer, a deep voice sounded behind them. Are you the kids Raul sent? They turned around and saw a huge man with a gray beard and a suspicious look. João nodded. Barba sighed and scratched his head. Raul told me you need to disappear, fast. As soon as possible, Davi confirmed. Barba looked around, then pointed to a bus, parked at the far end of the terminal. That one leaves in 15 minutes. It's heading inland. No records, no questions. If you get on, you disappear from this city. João felt a brief sense of relief. They had a way out. But then, the shadow in the distance, a shiver ran down his spine. He felt it before he even saw it. At the terminal entrance, standing like a wolf watching its prey, was the hunter, wearing the same dark coat, his hands in his pockets, as if he had all the time in the world. But his eyes were locked on them. He had found them. The race against time, run, Davi shouted. The group scattered, darting through the terminal. João held Isa tightly, weaving between chairs and people. The hunter began moving. His steps were calm but precise. He knew they had nowhere to go. The bus engine was already running. The doors were still open. Go, João yelled. Davi and Nina jumped inside. Vico followed right after. But the hunter was close. Too close. João felt the man's cold hand grab his shoulder. He shoved Isa onto the bus. And then, the hunter pulled him back. The final confrontation. João hit the ground of the terminal. The hunter crouched beside him, gripping his arm tightly. It's over, kid, he said, a cold smile on his lips. No one escapes Colonel Brandeo. João's eyes burned with rage. Then tell me, why is he so afraid of us? The hunter hesitated for just a second, and that was all João needed. He kicked the man hard in the stomach and ran. The bus was already moving. He sprinted as fast as he could, his breath ragged. At the last second, he jumped. Davi and Vico grabbed him, pulling him inside. The doors shut, and the hunter was left behind. A new beginning. They collapsed onto the seats, gasping for air. The bus drove onto the highway, leaving the city farther and farther behind. Isa hugged João tightly. "We did it," Nina whispered, tears in her eyes. João looked at his friends, his street family. The past was still there. The fear still existed. But now, they had something they had never had before. A chance. A future. And for the first time, the wind wasn't pushing them back. It was carrying them forward.